Anyone that you speak to thinks their pain is far superior to yours, and their life situation is much worse than yours. They don't see that there could be a similarity. Because when someone says to you, I think I'm dying and I'm going to die, she wasn't saying she was going to commit suicide, but it's a frightening kind of thing. So I promised to call her back today. I led a pretty full life. I raised 2 daughters. I had a business with my now ex-husband. It was a design and printing firm. It took a lot out of me. And after my kids were grown, I decided I wanted to do something to fulfill a lifelong dream. So I had ridden motorcycles when I was younger, and I went out and bought myself a Harley and went cross-country on it. Of course, somewhere in the middle of Wisconsin, I spun out on some gravel. The bike landed on my foot, messed it up very, very badly. And it was put in a cast, and I didn't think anything of it. I came home several months later. I climbed down the Grand Canyon with my crutches. I wasn't going to miss anything. When I got back, it turned out that I needed bone surgery, and I had that. And then I went back to work. I pushed myself more than I should have. I ended up having many operations for bone replacements and bone fusions until finally somebody said to me, I believe you have RSD. This was already 4 years after the accident. So I did find people to help treat me. None of them were able to help me successfully in any way at all. I also continued working because it was, we had to support the family. And I didn't take good care of myself. I kept breaking bones in my legs. At one point I was in a wheelchair because I was in casts on both legs. And then my feet started turning gangrenous, and the doctor immediately put me in the hospital. And I was there for quite a few months. There were blood clots, I had transfusions, I was in the intensive care, and a bit of an amputation. And the doctors finally said, you cannot work anymore. But by this time I was already 64, so I was pretty close to retirement. But the experience of coming close to losing my life did change me inside. It gave me more of an impetus to want to do something with whatever I had left. And I came from a family where giving was part of our woven fabric, going back generations. And even when I was at work, I would hire gang members, people that were from South America and spoke no English, and worked with them, changed the lives of a lot of these gang members. Wasn't successful with everybody, but that's what gave me the pleasure. In fact, I have one funny story. We had an older guy working for us, and he only had one tooth in his mouth. And he was an alcoholic, and one day at work, he must have been very drunk, and he fell, and he really, really hurt himself. And when he came back, I sat him down, and I said, I will make a deal with you. I will buy you new teeth if you will stop drinking. And he never drank again. And to me that was amazing, because I know that must be a very hard thing to stop. But those were the kinds of things that gave me pleasure. And as I said, before and after RSD, my life didn't change that much. The pain was very bad. It was very hard for me to get around. I was much slower. But I have discovered that you can't concentrate on 2 things at once. So while I was at work and very, very involved, I wasn't aware of the pain. When I got home, it was a different story. And I've carried that throughout the rest of my life. My feeling is that with anyone that has RSD, if they can, should try and give back to the community. And I've pretty much dedicated my life to that. I spend a lot of time on it. both speaking to patients, doing writing. I write a book, answering emails, and that not only helps other people, but it gives me a deep sense of satisfaction. I don't feel that I'm wasting my life, and I don't end up feeling sorry for myself as much as I would have, I think. So that's my story of RSD. It's still going on. I am sorry to say I am not in remission. Things have only gotten worse. The pain, for newer patients, I'd like them to know that the pain does change. The terrible burning pain eventually goes away, and it's replaced by a deeper kind of pain that's difficult to bear, but that intense burning pain is gone unless somebody hurts you where you've already been hurt, and then it may start up again. So over time, things do change. My biggest problem has been that as time has gone on, I've become more and more disabled. But that's not all due to CRPS. I have concomitant diseases that were probably a result of CRPS that have made life more difficult for me. Another thing I decided was that people do not like being around a miserable person. So I've become a very good actress, and the acting becomes a self-fulfilling thing. So that I may be feeling terrible inside, but if I put on a persona of someone that's happy and perky, as you say, I begin to feel that. And so the bad feelings go away. I save the most difficult parts for when I'm alone. If you have CRPS and you are being treated by doctors, you must advocate for yourself. They see a lot of patients. They don't always remember everything you've said. And one of the problems with medicine the way it is now is that it's very segregated. So if you go to someone for pain management, which most people do if they have CRPS, that doctor does not necessarily know the rest of what's going on in your body. And you have to make sure that they do. One of the things that I am most concerned about, because it affected me so very deeply, is that PT is often prescribed rather, and for most people it's an important component. I would highly recommend that before anybody with CRPS starts such a program, they have a bone density exam, because if you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, you can do yourself a great deal of harm with physical therapy. I broke many bones because of it. You know, you're told by the doctor that these are the treatments that are available and these are the treatments that will help. And they sort of make a statement of the pain. If you feel more pain when you're exercising, that pain is not going to hurt you. And I'm here to tell you that it can hurt you very badly. So I think that's a very important thing to do, and that's part of advocacy. I also think you should have your circulation checked. There are a lot of things that come along with CRPS. It affects different parts of your body, and you can't, first of all, you can't always assume that everything you're feeling is CRPS. I did just recently, even after knowing all of this, I started having tremendous back pain. And I finally went to the doctor and they took x-rays, and I had broken a whole bunch of vertebrae in my back. And that's what the pain was from, not CRPS. So it's really important not to just say everything I feel is CRPS. There are other things that can go on in your body. And you need to pay attention. You can't push yourself the way I did. It's not a good idea, because in the end, you're limiting what you're going to be able to do later. And then also you're going to find that some doctors are good for you and some aren't. I've been to pain management doctors that treated me terribly, and then I've had some very wonderful experiences. If you feel that a doctor is doing everything they can to try and help, that kind of makes you feel good, even if none of those things work. Usually they'll be upfront enough to go through every kind of treatment that's available. There aren't really that many anymore, but when I had been first diagnosed, there were a lot of other treatments that were tried and found not to be any good. So if the doctor's honest, he's going to explain to you what he's going to try and do. And if you're uncomfortable with any of it, you need to tell him, because it's your body. But you also have to listen to what the doctor says. So finding a good match is important, because it's a long-term relationship. It's kind of like a marriage. You may see this doctor, twice a month for many years to come. So I think that's very important. RSDSA helped me tremendously. I went first online to get information when I was first diagnosed, and that was quite helpful. And then I went to a patient symposium in Atlantic City, and I met people on the board, as well as, for the first time, meeting people that had CRPS. The interesting part of the experience is that I put these patients into two groups. Those that were so consumed with their disease and could not talk about anything else but their pain, and others who really wanted to be able to do more with their lives. And I made up my mind very quickly which group I wanted to belong to. The people on the board were so impressive. Such giving people, such upbeat people. Eventually Jim asked me to do some things for the board, which I was happy to do. I did some writing. As I said, I wrote a book about RSDSA with Dr. Moskowitz, who's also on the board. And I work very, very hard with Mary Beth as my co-chairman to promote support for the whole CRPS community. My feeling is, given that there are so few treatments available, that support may be the most important thing we can do for each other. So that's what I've pretty much committed myself to. And that can be one-on-one patient. It doesn't have to be a whole group of people. I firmly believe if I help someone and it works, they're going to help somebody else, and it keeps going. When most patients call after they've told their story and want to be listened to, they'll ask my advice on how I can organize my life and not feel that I'm a useless person. And I tell them that even though you have CRPS, you still have you inside, you still have your mind. Find something that used to give you pleasure before and adapt it to make it give you pleasure again. And if you can then use that to help other people, that makes it even more wonderful. And actually, Jim is the one that told me, you never lose your mind, it's always there. It may not work quite as well, but that's the one thing that nobody can take away from you. So I learned to live a lot in my imagination. I have conversations with all kinds of people because my life is rather isolated, and I don't want that to get me down. I do make calls when people need me. I answer their emails. Sometimes the emails go on for years because people's needs never change, at least in some cases. But others you become friends with over a period of time. And there's a tremendous interaction between the other board members too. We may disagree on things, but almost always in the end we come together. We're a group that knows how to listen to each other and respect each other's opinions. And we try to make it so that everyone is in agreement on whatever project or idea we have. And that's very special. As part of the patient support, something that's very, very dear to my heart is our Patient Assistance Fund. Along with CRPS often comes terrible financial burdens, whether it's because these people can't get insurance, They lose their jobs. They're living on minimum help from the government, especially in certain parts of the country where they get almost nothing. They find that they can't pay for medication, for a doctor's visit, and up until now we've been able to fund those kinds of things. My dream is to increase this fund tremendously so that we can help more in the long term, to be able to change a patient's house into something that's physically, that's designed for the physically handicapped. If you can't get into the bathtub, you're in trouble. If you can't get into the bathroom, you're in trouble. If you can't get up steps, you're in trouble. So these things are important. Also, many of them can't pay the rent, even though it's very, very minimal. And we'll need help with that for quite a while, because it's possible they may never be able to go back to work. The other thing I would like to see done is have us work with local communities, their resources, and state and federal resources to make sure we're not paying for something that they could get paid for. And to have someone follow up with these people to make sure they're still doing okay, or as well as possible. So that's a big thing for me. And the other big thing is to really increase the number of support groups, and to make them function in a much better way than they are now. I think everybody needs a friend, or several friends, not necessarily to complain to, but to come together and do something constructive, to share ideas that they found that make their lives easier. Because all of us find adaptation techniques, and they're usually not shared one with the other, but this would be a way of doing it. Or of even presenting a problem. One person may have a particular problem that she can't overcome, either physically or emotionally, and the others may have ideas on how to do that. So I think that's going to be a major financial effort, a major manpower effort, but I believe we can do it. There was a time when I was very, very depressed, and I saw no future. Interestingly enough, it was at the same time that I was undergoing vasculitis attacks, and I was on high dosages of steroids and drugs that keep you from rejecting, to suppress the immune system. I was on them for 4 years, very, very high dosages. And the vasculitis itself was extraordinarily painful. It required many, many surgeries, and really prevented me from getting around at all. I am in remission now from that, thank God. I'm no longer on the medications, and I no longer have the depression. So I realized there was a direct link to the medications and the depression. Now what I try and do is, no matter how bad the day has been, or how terrible the night has been, because they usually are, I still go to sleep thinking that tomorrow is going to be better. And it doesn't always happen, but for some reason I do feel that way. I don't know how to explain that. I think part of it is that I'm very grateful to be alive. I have a wonderful family, and that helps a lot too. And I feel a responsibility to other people that have CRPS, which I also think contributes a great deal to the way I feel. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are days where I could just crawl up and cry myself to try and handle the pain, because it gets so extreme. I used to find the nights very difficult because I don't sleep. I get maybe an hour or two, and that's a long stretch of time. So I changed my concept of the night, and I decided that instead of looking at it as something that was terrible and lonely, that it was something that was created especially for me, a time when nobody could bother me, when I could let my imagination run free, when I could do whatever I want, whether it was listening to music or reading or listening to TV or writing. And the nights seemed to fly by, and I no longer resented the fact that I couldn't sleep. I may be very tired in the morning and have trouble getting up, but I felt I had to do that. If you have CRPS, there are a lot of things about your life that are very difficult to handle. If you can change your perception of those parts, your life will be more fulfilling. For me, it was changing my concept of what the night was like, because the pain keeps you up and you often can't sleep. And I would look at it as something terrible and something I had to get through minute by minute. And then I decided I could change the way I looked at it and make it something that was personal and special for myself. So if you can do that, even if you take one area and try and do that, I think it can help in your life, no matter whether you have CRPS or not. In CRPS, what's changed is that there usually is a much earlier diagnosis. And it seems that if you're diagnosed early, you have a far greater chance of going into remission or even a cure. If you've had long-standing RSDS rather, that's not likely to happen, at least in the experience I've had of speaking to people. There are doctors that may disagree. I think some of them may fudge their numbers a little bit. Excuse me. But I think you just have to make peace with it. You know, life isn't fair. I would rather live and be happy than spending my life being miserable. I used to let myself have a pity party, and I would set a timer for about 15 minutes. And during those 15 minutes, I would let myself have every dark thought imaginable. And I had something prepared to do it that I liked at the end of the 15 minutes, whether it was going outside if I were capable, watching a good movie, reading a good short story. And that worked for me because I was able to limit it so that it didn't spread throughout the whole day, and I could get myself back on track. Now again, it doesn't always work, but it's a tool that I came up with that was helpful to me. And I think that really is what living with any chronic disease is about. It's finding tools that you can use to be able to bring you out of what your body is feeling and enjoy your other senses, your imagination, your ability to think, being with friends. Any of those kinds of things that can bring you pleasure are very important. I guess everybody has their own sense of spirituality. I have found in talking to patients that those that have a very strong faith seem to do better than those that don't. On the other hand, I have my own kind of faith. It's not an organized religion, but I do believe that if there's a God, he exists in each one of us, and we all have the ability to do wonderful things. And we all have the ability to do some bad things. I was lucky enough to spend a day with the Dalai Lama, and I think he influenced me a great deal. When you're with him, you do feel that he's a holy man, and the fact that he took time out from his busy schedule to spend that time with me was pretty special. And I have talked to other clergymen. I had gone to church with Jim, and I fell in love with his, what do you call it, preacher, minister?
Pastor. Yeah.
Pastor. I'm always looking for people that I feel are wiser than myself. And maybe that's my kind of spirituality, rather than an organized religion kind of thing. I've always continued to help people because that was so ingrained in me. And I have continued with having the CRPS because it actually makes me feel better about myself. It's kind of a selfish thing. If I had not gotten CRPS, I would have lived a much different kind of life. You can tell by the fact that I went cross-country on a motorcycle that I love being active, or did love being active physically. There were many countries I would have liked to have visited. There are a lot of things I would have liked to have done. I would have liked to have continued my photography, but I don't spend time regretting any of that. I feel lucky for the things I did get to do. And I think we all have to do that, because you never know what's going to happen to you. Your good health can be taken away at an instant for any kind of reason. And I think the wonderful thing about most human beings is that they are adaptable. And if they weren't, they wouldn't keep on living. So I think about that a lot. When I counsel people with CRPS, I see everybody as an individual. Their commonality is that they have CRPS. And when I first speak to them, usually they're not at a good point in their lives. And they just want someone to listen to them. They want to tell their story. They want to tell how miserable everything is for them. And then after they get that out, it's easier to go on to other things and say to them, well, what did you like doing before you had CRPS? And some of them will say, oh, I used to love scrapbooking. I said, what would prevent you from doing scrapbooking now? And they would think and say, actually nothing. And I said, maybe you could make these scrapbooks and sell them at your church bazaar to raise funds for CRPS. That's just one example. Others would talk about the fact that they found solace in their faith. Still others would not concede that there was anything they could do to help themselves, no matter what. But I would find that while the beginning of the conversation might have been filled with rage and anger, by the time we talked for a while, that disappeared. I think that is a commonality in CRPS, especially in certain people where there's this overwhelming rage. Why did this happen to me? Why can't anybody help me? Why do I have to feel pain that's so beyond anything anybody can experience? And you can't give answers to that. I mean, life just happens. But if you let them, I believe that by talking that out to somebody, maybe even more so to somebody that's been through it and can understand and is not going to criticize them and is not going to tell them it's all in their head, because that becomes a very big issue, I think it does help. The help may only be temporary, which is why I keep up with a lot of these people. I often counsel people with CRPS, and some of them are more needy than others. And while the one conversation may help, it could be a temporary help. So it's very important for RSDSA to be able to follow up with these people. Let's face it, right now there is no cure. There's no medicine that's going to take away the pain. Doctors rely on physical therapy and behavioral modification, which may or may not do anything for a patient. So we need more money to be able to put into this support of these individual patients. It's very hard to know how to go on when you get no help from the medical community, and you really end up falling back on yourselves. And in this case, there's an organization that can help support you. I help people selfishly because it takes my mind off of myself. It's doing good for somebody else, and I'm a firm believer in that if one little action can keep being passed on. And so I look at it as I'm helping one patient at a time, and that's going to eventually reach many, many patients. And we can quicken that by having these strong support groups through RSDSA, because then we're committing to helping whole groups of people at a time. And I wasn't nervous. You did very well.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Well, getting your questions helped. It really did, to focus myself.
All right?
You were very focused.
Oh my gosh.